Hey there, race fans. It's race day top 5 with me, Frank 5. Kansas Speedway, a fast track, multiple crews of racing, intense restarts. And yesterday, we saw a lot of action, post-race scuffle, and a thrilling battle for the win at the end of the race. Let's get into all that went down in Kansas. Number 1, Denny Hamlin pulls through finally as he gets his first win of the 2023 season, winning yesterday's Advent Health 400 at Kansas Speedway, beating Kyle Larson, William Byron, Bubba Wallace, and Ross Chastain for the victory. Denny Hamlin yesterday, very, very strong race car. From practice, strong car, qualified route. And from the drop of the green flag, that 11 car was on rails. That car was so fast, particularly when it came to the long runs. Because we had an early caution early on in the race with one of our contenders. And then after that restart, we went green all the way till the end of stage 1, and that 11 car was on rails, as mentioned. He was flying, he was pulling away from everybody else. He was battling with his teammate Martin Truex Jr. for the most part, but Hamlin was just so strong, and that's what got him stage 1, obviously. In stage 2, he kind of fluctuated between 4th to 6th for the most part because there was obviously a couple cautions, and that kind of eliminated some long runs. But for the most part, he kept his track position, even with a couple of slow pit stops during that stage, but he held his track position. And the final stage, he kind of slipped back to as low as 8th, but then rallied back and got himself up into the top 5 on that final restart, and he was running down Kyle Larson at the very end of that race. The long runs, again, they were Denny Hamlin's best friend, and he was given everything he had on those final few laps running down Kyle Larson, who was battling a relatively loose race car. Every time Hamlin got up to beside Kyle Larson, or even on the inside of him, he had a fender there, but had to give up the momentum in turn 1, 2, because if he slipped at the track, he would take both himself and the 5 car probably out of contention for the win. He gave it everything he had, and on the last lap, he got himself in position when Larson had a moment off of 2. Hamlin gets the bumper, and accidentally, or in general, he got into the back of the 5 car, sending Larson into the outside wall. Hamlin goes by and goes on to win the race at Kansas and makes him the winningest driver at Kansas Speedway, and giving Joe Gibbs their 400th win as a Cup Series organization, which is a very incredible landmark for that team. But Hamlin, he really needed a win because obviously we're at this point in the season where we're almost halfway through the regular portion of the 2023 schedule before the playoffs start in September, and Denny Hamlin hadn't won a race yet up until yesterday. They've had good race cars this year. There's no doubt about that. Hamlin is a talented race car driver, but there would always be something that would prevent them from the way they were running to give them an opportunity to get to victory circle. There would always be something that would just cost them, particularly pit road, because that's been Denny Hamlin's Achilles heel ever since 2016. It's either the pit crew make a mistake, whether it's an uncontrolled tire, improper fueling of the race car, leaving a lug nut on or like leaving a lug nut off, and they have to go back and quickly apply the lug to the tire. Or it's Denny Hamlin himself, particularly speeding, because he's done a lot of that on pit road. Or he gets into some incidents on the racetrack that, quite frankly, he doesn't deserve to be a part of, and he doesn't deserve to get caught up in an incident. It's been that way for most of the season. I mean, Richmond had perhaps the best car in that race. But if that incident on pit road in the final stage never occurred, Denny Hamlin probably could have won that race. But unfortunately, it was the pit crew, and he had a speeding penalty late when he was kind of deep anyways. So in a way, it was a lose-lose situation for the 11 team. But this weekend and yesterday, mistake-free all day. Despite one slow stop, they were relatively mistake-free, and that's why they were celebrating yesterday's victory. Now, he got a pretty rough reaction from the crowd afterwards because he's not really been a fan favorite with the crowd ever since 2017 with what he did to Chase Elliott at Martinsville, and he can be relatively a polarizing driver, but there's no denying the talent that this guy has, and there's a reason why he's one of the 75 greatest NASCAR drivers that we have in our sport. And now he's in the playoffs, and now with the win, he's going to get hot, and he could probably start winning more and more races because he broke a 33-race winless streak that dates all the way back to last May's Coca-Cola 600. And he's going to be trying to go for that 600 in just a few weeks. But next week, he's got a track that he loves, he adores. He's won there so many times in Cup and Xfinity. I guarantee you he will be in the conversation for the victory. But Hamlin and the 11 team, victorious yesterday, and they are officially in the playoffs. Number 2, Larson, runner-up at Kansas once again. Kyle Larson from the get-go yesterday at the start of the race, very strong race car. But ran into a problem literally 5 laps into the race where he's leading coming off of turn 4, and right behind him, Tyler Reddick bumps into the back of the 5 car, sends him spinning into the grass, but thankfully didn't tear up the race car. It brought up the first caution, so he has to come down pit road, put on some new tires because If he had maybe continued with those tires that he went around on, it would have flat spotted and damaged the fenders, and you do not want that with this car. But regardless, Larson was able to get back up to the field and got back to 10th spot at the end of stage 1, showing how strong the race car was. And then stage 2, he kept going forward and forward and forward and forward, and it looked like he was going to win the stage until we had a late yellow in that segment, and he had to settle for mid-race points at the end of that stage. In the final stage, he brought his A game, and he just had such a good race car yesterday, and he's one of the guys that you can trust at this racetrack with the multiple crews that we use. If you use that top lane, nobody does it better than Kyle Larson. And it looked like that he was prepared to win yesterday's race to make up for the one he got away last year when he was closing in on Kurt Busch for the victory but came up short. But this time, he was the one that was playing defense and still fell short. And of course, as mentioned, the incident on the last lap, Hamlin gets a big run down the backstretch, Larson clears him, and then Hamlin gets to the bumper, taps the 5, and sends the 5 straight into the outside wall. But despite that, Larson was able to limp that wrecked race car home for second place. He wasn't particularly happy with the way the 11 car handled that last lap. He felt like Denny could have... He said on the radio that, Denny, you're better than that. You're much better than that. And it felt like there was a little bit of, disrespect. But sometimes when it comes to the last lap and everything's on the line, it's every man for himself. There are no allies out there. And that's kind of what happened in the final lap. But despite that, after 2 bad races the past few weeks where they've had good race cars but get caught up in incidents, this is a good way for Larson to bounce back from that incident. And he's been one of the best cars that we've had this year. I mean, he has the 2 wins. He could have gotten win number 3 yesterday, but Hamlin wanted it more, I feel like, especially with the long runs that we had in that last stint. But despite that, Larson had a good race car yesterday. Number 3, Chastain and controversy. Once again, another race where we cannot stop having a topic that involves Ross Chastain, whether it's good or bad. For the most part, early on yesterday, it was good. He was clean for the most part, had a good race car running up in the top 5, top 10 with the Gibbs cars and the limited Hendrick cars that we had up there. But then we come to stage 2 and he runs into some controversy where he actually made contact with Kyle Busch in the A car while they were battling for 6th spot down the back stretch and on the front stretch. When the caution came out, Kyle Busch on the radio was not really pleased with how Chastain was running him. Now later in the race, Kyle Busch gets taken out in an incident on the turn 2 down the backstretch, but that was not Chastain's doing. It was someone else that did it. Chastain was in front of that. But Chastain was not done with running into somebody yesterday, or at least having a moment with someone. Off of turn 4, while running 3 wide, Chastain's in the middle between, I can't remember who was on the bottom, but on the outside was the 42 car of Noah Gragson. Chastain gets a little bit tight, drifts with the track just a tiny bit, but never made contact with the 42 car, but the dirty air sent the 42 car into the outside wall. Not completely hard, basically wreck, but it kind of hurt the aerodynamics, and Gragson comes down to respond saying, with a little tap on the door, I don't appreciate what you just did right there, buddy. Well, after that, I'm probably not buddies anymore. But despite that, Chastain was able to press on and actually was able to get back up into the top 5, finish 5th. Noah Gragson had an incident a little bit after that contact, and that was cut the right front tire and he sent him spinning, and he finished 5 laps down, which was unfortunate because that 42 car was perhaps going to finish in the top 15 with how well they ran yesterday until that happened. The post-race comes. Gragson, not happy, goes over and confronts Ross Chastain post-race and say, I don't know what's up with you. And he said, I just got tight. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't even get into you. My car just got tight and the dirty affected, and Noah Gragson was not having any of it, so he proceeds to grab Ross Chastain's fire suit, his racing suit, and Chastain said, let me go, because if you go, there's a clip on YouTube with the audio of what they're talking about. Chastain was clearly telling Noah Gragson to let him go. And when Noah didn't let him go and he kept, grabbing the suit and pushing him a little forward, Chastain responds with a sucker punch, and they get into a little tussle, but the officials quickly broke it up, and Gragson walked away pretty upset. Chastain finished with a top 5. Gragson finished 5 laps down, deep in the pack, when it could have been a top 15 day for him. So it's really tough, especially when Ross Chastain is dealing with controversy, like how he races people. We go back to what happened 2 weeks ago. These two had an incident in overtime where Chastain goes 3 wide, Gragson comes down, and he gets turned, and he gets into the outside wall, taking him out of contention for victory or possible top 5 finish. And then last weekend, Chastain gets in the back of the 15 car, Brennan Poole, and going into turn 1 at Dover. Sends the 15 around, up the track, collects the 5 car of Kyle Larson, and leaving Larson and Brennan Poole very upset, even though Chastain apologized for what happened. It just seems like every weekend there's something that involves Ross Chastain in the one car getting into somebody. But what happened with him and the 42 car on the track? It wasn't Chastain's fault. Obviously, they're racing, and when you get tight and you push up the track and you affect the guy on the outside, the dirty air, it's part of racing. He didn't intentionally force to go up the track to send the 42 in the wall to get the position. He's just racing, and unfortunately, that's how the car was handling back there and affected the dirty air. He was able to, again, to bounce back for a top 5 finish, but I mean, him and these controversies are just very interesting. It does make for great television, folks. It is really good for television. But Noah was not happy. Actually, when he was walking away, Chase Elliott comments saying somebody had to do it, like meaning somebody had to go and confront, because it seems like every time people complain about Ross Chastain, they don't go up to him post-race and tell him straight to their face. Noah kind of took the high road and just said, you know what, I'll go talk to him and I'll let him know how I felt about what happened, which I give Gragson credit, but at the same time, Noah, no offense, but how has your team been doing this year? Not that good. Now, obviously, this week they announced that they're switching to Toyota next year, but Chastain's running top 5, top 10, and contending for race wins right now. And Noah, you are a rookie, and I do feel like you have a cup future, but right now, you guys are not running it well. I kind of applaud you for going up and basically letting Chastain know, I don't appreciate what happened on the track, but that wasn't Ross Chastain's fault out there on the racetrack. But it's the heat of the moment sometimes in this stuff. But Chastain got a good result, but unfortunately, he's involved again. He's involved in another talking point. Number 4, Byron bounces back. William Byron qualified on the pole on Saturday and seemed to have a car capable early on to battle for the lead and maybe contend for the race win. Well, there's a moment early on in the race, 4 laps in, where he's leading coming off of turn 2, and all of a sudden the car just breaks loose. Now, he didn't spin completely and bring out a caution. He was able to hang on, but he lost the lead in the process. So they had to come down pit road and change those tires, and they had to fight their way back up through the field. Then we come to green flag pit stops in the middle of stage 1. Byron gets caught for speeding on pit road and has to come back and serve a penalty that puts him a lap down. And then another point in the race, he actually made contact with the wall and had to pit again, and that put him 2 laps down. And despite all that, he got both of his laps back by taking the wave run on one of those cautions, getting the free pass on one of those cautions when it's the first car lap down. And by the time stage 2 ends and stage 3 begins, the 24 cars running in the top 10 and contending for the race lead. Matter of fact, he actually led some laps in stage 3. That's how good his race car was yesterday, and a great bounce back by that race team to overcome adversity early on and get a good result out of it. That's teamwork, and that's a sign of a championship contender. Again, some people are probably thinking, Byron, a championship contender? We haven't seen that in Cup. But this year, it seems like year 3 with Rudy Fugle, they're knocking it out of the park. They've had good race cars. They have 2 race wins. They're a good race team. They're one of the top teams in Hendrick right now, aside from Kyle Larson. They're the only 2 drivers that have obviously won, but they've been very good this year. And as long as they can keep this momentum up and bounce back from adversity early on and get good results like that yesterday, we could be talking about William Byron in Phoenix later this year for the championship. And he won there earlier this year. Keep that in mind. I know it's early, but still, what we're seeing from William Byron this year on good days and even able to make a bad day out of into a good one at the end shows you how strong that 24 team is this year. And number 5, the action yesterday. Let me just say this. Yesterday was race of the season. From the get-go, the drop of the green flag, the racing was fantastic. Side-by-side battles everywhere you looked. Bottom, middle, high groove. They're all running everywhere around the racetrack. Now, obviously, we all know in the past, restarts at Kansas have been so much fun, but there are times where the last few years of the Gen 6 car, that this car kind of affected the air a lot, especially when we ran the 550 package. But when we debuted this next-gen car last year, this race, the racing was phenomenal, and the racing in the fall was very good. This race was the best out of the 3 races we've had at Kansas so far. I mean, that race yesterday was phenomenal. And we didn't have one dominant car yesterday. We had multiple guys that were leading. We had a Kyle Larson. We had a Denny Hamlin. Martin Truex Jr. was really good at one point. Chastain was battling up front. We had Byron. Bubba Wallace ran well. Chase Elliott, who qualified bad but ran up front for majority of stage 2 and stage 3 actually led at one point. Seemed like he maybe had something for him. Tyler Reddick was good at the beginning. Chastain was good. Logano came on strong at the end. There wasn't really one true dominant race car yesterday. There was multiple guys that had the track position and had the maneuverability to move around any place they wanted to. Now, again, it's kind of similar to the race we had in 2019, but that race was the Gen 6 car, the 550 package, and we were under the lights. This was a day race where yesterday it was so hot and slick, you had to maneuver around the race right. Now, when we came into long runs, everybody was using the top of the end because they were saving that right front tire running up towards the long as you don't hit that wall. But yesterday's racing, the battle for the win in the end, I mean, and the restarts, it was just a great race yesterday. I mean, we've had some good races this year. Yesterday's race was the best race of the season. And let me just say this. The next-gen car works well, as made mile-and-a-half racing and 2-mile tracks better. But the mile-and-a-half track of Kansas and the next-gen car go together like peanut butter and jelly. This track and the next-gen car, it's just, shall I say, a perfect marriage. It's just great racing for the fans. And the crowd we had yesterday to see that race and that finish, I hope they got their money's worth because that was amazing yesterday. I applaud Kansas and this next-gen car. I think the tire combination also worked well at this race yesterday. Again, no true dominant race car unless, of course, you had the clean air, but there were times where you couldn't get more than about a second and a half ahead of the guy running right behind you if you were the leader. That's how competitive and close the action was yesterday. So, round of applause to everybody yesterday that put in a good show, despite a couple of cautions in stage 2 and early stage 3. The racing yesterday was just fantastic. I cannot wait for this race in fall, especially when it's a playoff race. So now that we're no longer in Kansas anymore, Wizard of Oz reference, now we're off to Darlington, South Carolina for Throwback Weekend at Darlington Race. We've got throwback schemes, we've got Legends of the Sport. We got Ryan Newman coming back next weekend. Yeah, he'll be driving for Rick Ware Racing. And no, it's not the best equipment, but we get to see the Rocket Man back, and that's very awesome. And I'm excited about the broadcast, too, because we've got Richard and Kyle Petty in the booth for Stage 1 with Mike Joy and Clint Boyer. So they're taking Kyle off alone from NBC to come call this race. And Stage 2, welcome back, backflip Carl Edwards. Yes, we haven't seen Carl Edwards in the public a few times, but not, like, in front of a full camera at a main event, whether he was in the car or up in the broadcast booth, since his retirement after the sport in 2016. He's been out of the public for a while. He's made a few sporadic appearances, but he's going to be able to call Stage 2 next weekend, which is going to be a lot of fun. And for the final stage, like he did last year, Awesome Bill from Dawsonville, who was known in this race and its $1 million prize races, $1 million Bill Elliott will be in the final stage. And by the way, real quickly, Chase honoring Bill with the 2002 Breaker 400 paint scheme. I love that scheme. I really do. But very excited to have some legends of the sport, drivers, some that are Hall of Famers, one that could be a future Hall of Famer, and 2 names of one of the most successful families in the sport. I cannot wait for Darlington next weekend with those throwback schemes, the tires, the racing, and some legends calling the race. It's going to be a fun weekend. So who will come out on top? Will we see a thrilling, interesting end last year like we did with Logano and William Byron? Will Denny Hamlin carry off momentum from this win at Kansas into next weekend at one of his best tracks? Or will Kyle Larson make up for some of the races that has kind of slipped through his fingers at this racetrack? We shall see, but it'll be a fun weekend. So hope you all have a wonderful week. Subscribe, like, and congrats once again to Denny Hamlin, Chris Gabehart, and the 11 team on their impressive win at Kansas yesterday. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Let's go racing!